okay? And an estate plan, when I said estate considerations, there are 3 primary documents that constitute an estate plan. The first is a will, and a will is a written document that must be properly executed. And properly executed must mean that you are of sound mind when you sign it and date it, and that it's also witnessed by 2 people who are not friends and family, okay? So properly executed documents must be created in order to give them legal standing, so that when you're not here, people can rely on the instruction as what you truly wanted. And the will does all kinds of stuff. It says what to do with your stuff. So that can be a list of property, like I want this kid to get the china cabinet. I want this kid to get the beaver gear, okay? It also says what to do with your money. A will names, in Washington State, we call the person a personal representative. Oftentimes we hear the word executor or executrix, that's the female version. That's the person who is in charge of your estate. In Washington State, you name your personal representative. The lingo is the personal rep, and that's the person that takes charge of all of your stuff after you're not here, and is the team captain for getting your estate completed and managing the instructions in your will. You need to identify not only the person to serve in that role, but a second person in case they are not here, incapable, or resign the opportunity to serve, okay? So personal representative, you need 2 of those. Then if there's money that's to be left after your estate, okay, so money that is left behind for kids to use, then you need to find a trustee, and we're going to talk more about what that means later, but you need to find that person, okay? And then the third thing is, if you have children who are under the age of majority or who are part of a guardianship, you need to designate who that person is to care for your child. All right, so that's the playbook that's outlined in a will, okay? That's the kind of one that everybody knows of. The second one, and time permitting tonight, we're going to look at how to find one that you can do, is a healthcare directive or a living will. These are critically important right now. So right now, if our 19-year-old daughter ended up in the hospital, okay, and she's with us and she's healthy and that's all wonderful, but let's say she was still in Cheney, Washington at Eastern Washington University, and she was admitted to the hospital with the coronavirus, okay, on our minds. A physician or hospital cannot contact us if she's the age of majority, which she is at age 19, to talk to us about her condition if she hasn't written that into a healthcare directive. I'm dead serious about this. So having that document in force for ourselves and for people we care about not only talks about how we want to be treated, but who needs to know about our care. All right. That's a really, really, really important document. And that's leg 2 of an estate plan. And then the third leg is called the power of attorney. And I want to say a word about that as it relates to caring for adults with disabilities. You know, so when children you have reached the age of majority, 18 or older in Washington State, a power of attorney can limit the authority of a person with disabilities without getting to a place where they're part of a guardianship, okay? So it gives you some levels of legal control without going all the way to guardianship. But as it relates to me or you and your estate plan, it's the person you assign to take care of your financial affairs. And there are 2 kinds, and more legal mumbo jumbo, durable and springing, okay? A durable power of attorney goes into effect the day you sign it and it's properly executed. A springing power of attorney goes into effect when an event happens, like you're not able to take care of yourself. And that might be in the judgment of a court, or a power of attorney might be drafted in a way that if in the view of my spouse, I am no longer able to take care of myself and she signs and dates it as of this date, then from that point forward, the power of attorney is in effect. But what that document does is it makes it, Cindy, yes, I'm droning on.
We have a question that just came up and I wanted to make sure that it got asked.
Yes.
It is a state rep the same person as a trustee?
No, it is not. A personal representative of your estate is not a trustee. Those are different roles. Good question. Okay. So the personal representative is in charge of your estate, and the trustee is the person, and we're going to talk about trusts here. You're on the right track. The trustee is the person who's in charge of any money that's left in trust. And if you don't know what money left in trust means, stay tuned. Okay. And I dragged the chat window right here on the screen, so I will get the next question. Thanks, Sin. Okay, so on power of attorneys then, that allows somebody the legal authority to act as if it was you as it relates to financial matters, like enter into contracts, buy and sell securities, move money from bank to bank, open a bank account. These are all the things that are financially related. And if you don't have this in place, and like if I had a bank account that's only for me, if Cindy's not my power of attorney, that bank can't even tell Cindy I'm a client, okay? And you might want it that way, but there might come a time where you'd like somebody to know and to be able to take action if you can't, and that takes a power of attorney. And when we knit those three documents together, we have an estate plan, okay? Whoop. All right, so now this next slide is transferring things. And this is the idea of how you pass things on to others after you're not here. And what I specifically wanted to do in this kind of cheesy graphic is highlight that men die first, okay? Husbands punch their tickets on average faster than spouses, their wives. So that means the surviving spouse, typically a wife, is in charge of getting assets under the care of their children. Similarly, and this is a terrible statistic that Cindy and I just find sad all the time, is most relationships that have children with special needs end in divorce. And typically the caring parent is a mother. So that's why I want to make sure that you are clear about how money moves from one generation to the next. And there are three paths that takes, okay? And they're in order, all right? The first is a beneficiary designation form. And that's like if you get an insurance policy, or you have a retirement account, or you have some bank account and you fill out the beneficiary designation form, and that's basically who should get it when you're not here, then that is the highest level. It trumps all other instructions, and the money goes directly to the person or designee, and a designee could be a trust, and we'll talk about that here in a second, of whatever that asset is. So let's say I have a $100,000 life insurance policy and I pass away, my beneficiary is Cindy, okay? That's beneficiary designation form. Typically those move very rapidly, like within a matter of business days, okay? Versus weeks and months, which is how long wills can take, okay? The second form is a will. And if we don't have a beneficiary designation form, and now we want stuff to go to a next generation, we look at a will, okay? And the process of moving it using a will is called probate, P-R-O-B-A-T-E. And probate is led by your personal representative. And one thing that must go through probate is any real estate that you own, unless it's held in trust. Okay, I don't want to get too complicated, but like take the house. Cindy and I live on Bonsella Street. Cindy and I own this house. If I pass away before Cindy, the will says Cindy gets the house, okay? And the will and our personal representative of the estate would say, please remove Lawson from the deed. It's now my house, okay? And why this is important in estate planning is, well, what happens next? Who's to get the house next? And that leads us to trusts. Okay, trusts don't transfer stuff, property, money, stocks, retirement accounts, cash from one person to another. It transfers money from one person to a trust, and the trust owns it. and then the trust makes it useful for that person. Okay. Okay. So we're going to give a little detail on trusts, but trusts are really important for families who have special needs considerations because we get the use of what's in the trust without anybody owning it. And that's really, really, really important when we get to means-based tests. Okay. So 3 primary ways of transfer: beneficiary designation form, a will, or finally, don't give it to somebody, put it in trust and let them benefit from it. Okay, so the trust stops short of ownership by the other party. Okay. So with that, I'm going to go to my next slide. And let's talk a little bit more deeply about trusts. So a trust is a document, and usually it's drafted by an attorney. Sometimes there are plug and chug language, so they're kind of fill in the blank documents, but typically an attorney drafts them and they are declared. That's the language that's used. So we've got lots of technical legal language. So we've used inter vivos, testamentary, durable, springing, and now I'm on to declared. So the trust is declared, and that usually means you sign and date it, and now it has legal standing. It gets its own business version of a social security number called an EIN, which identifies it as its own entity, and then stuff is put in it. You can then open a bank account. You can change the title of a house from like joint tenants, Cindy and Lawson, to the trust, and we benefit from the trust. Okay, so trusts hold property, and it must have a trustee. I could be a trustee, you could be a trustee. You can hire somebody to be a trustee, but it's somebody that must be trusted. And they have an obligation to do what's right with what's in the trust, and they follow the instructions in the trust as it's declared. A trust has to file its own taxes every year, so it has a separate tax return. But what ends up happening is that we get the beneficial use of the stuff that's in the trust. Think of a bucket and something lives in it, and that the use of the stuff in it is of benefit to someone, but they never own it. Okay, so trusts permit beneficial use without ownership. And that becomes really important when we transition to what are called special needs trusts. And that gets us to some technical language around benefits eligibility. And I want to primarily focus on, I'm staring at this on the left-hand side, SSI and Medicaid, because these are the primary benefits that are tested for means. And I put in red something really, really important. And it's basically one of the tests is that you don't have more than $2,000 in assets in your name. So the case I know of is Molly, all right? So we have a few $100 in a bank account for Molly. These are things that she owns, okay? And an insurance company was able to give us a really small life insurance policy. I think it's like $5,000 or $8,000, and it has cash value in it. And Molly could surrender that and get a whopping $95. Okay, so now you know everything that Molly owns that would be tested for means, right? And you can see there's a list of exemptions: your house, a car, personal property. Molly's iPad doesn't count against her $2,000. And then here's what's also important: these next two. SNT is lingo for special needs trust. Anything in a special needs trust is invisible to a means-based test. So that's why it's important for you to know about those. And then we're going to talk about what are ABLE accounts. And balances of ABLE accounts are also mostly exempt, and it's a specific number. It's $100,000. So balances in ABLE accounts under $100,000 are exempt from means-based tests. Why is that important? Because if you go above it, you lose access to Medicaid or health insurance, and you can lose your Social Security income. And those are two primary drivers of support and care for people living with disability, especially in adulthood, and especially if you're not here, okay? So really, really, really important. So that's the idea of a means-based test, and there's an income and assets test, and I'm focusing on the assets part of this. And we want to preserve SSI and Medicaid eligibility for people living with developmental disabilities. And we do that by making plans. So it changes how we transfer things, all right? So we've got the same transfer diagram, except now something's changed, that the person we're transferring to has special needs. So in this case, we do not want to designate them in a beneficiary designation form, because then they become the owner, all right? And this is not just you, this is now why you need to tell people that love your child about your plan for them, because what you don't want is Aunt Millie leaving your kid a $5,000 life insurance policy, and they get $5,000 in cash, and now they get to disclose that, and their $2,000 test is surpassed, and they lose their Social Security income, and they lose their health insurance because of that nice and generous gift of $5,000, okay? So do not let yourself or anybody that cares about your kid name your child with a developmental disability in their beneficiary designation form. You need to find an alternative for that. Also, give no property outright to your child through your will. Do not do that. You saw that there was a list of exempt properties. Those would be okay, but do you want your child to have title to your house as a place to live? It might be best to use an alternative structure like a trust. Okay, which leads us to this third one. And in the original sample, I just had the word trust. And now I'm talking about two specific vehicles, the special needs trust, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that during the time we have remaining, and then also ABLE accounts. And those are the primary vehicles you want to take advantage of to have resources in place so that your child maintains access to the resources and access to public benefits. Okay, so question, can you name your beneficiary as the trust and then name your child in the trust? Correct. So Jeannie Walter, you're spot on. And we're going to talk specifically about that structure here in a second. Okay, so now I want to talk about these tools, and then we'll go about, how do you apply them? So these are things that you might not have known are already in your toolbox and available to you to make use of, even though you might not know about them yet. Okay, these exist and they are close at hand. So this title is called the Self-Settled or First Party Special Needs Trust. I told you most of this is about family estate considerations. Okay, this is one example that is about your loved one. Okay, and this is a first party special needs trust or a self-settled special needs trust. This is one that they would create from their own resources. Okay, so imagine a future where Molly works at an office. Okay, she's also said that she wants to work at Yamas Greek Restaurant. Good on you, Molly. Well, what if she didn't spend any money and she got a paycheck and her paycheck got to $2,000 or more? And she's now lost her public benefit of access to SSI eligibility and access to Medicaid eligibility. So she can create a trust and put her own money in it. Okay, there are restrictions. It's irrevocable. So once you put money in, it's stuck in there. Okay, it has to have a sole benefit. A special needs trust can only be for that person, like Molly Knight. There must be a disability. It must be created before age 65. And it has to be established by parents, grandparents, guardian, or a court. And here's a really key factor, is this last bullet here, Medicaid reimbursement. So if our children access public healthcare resources during their lifetime, if they have any money left over when they're gone, the government maintains the right to call on those resources to reimburse themselves so that they can use those same resources to spend on other people. Okay, during their lifetime, they can't access those resources. But if there's a balance remaining in a special needs trust, then Medicaid can seek to be reimbursed. So they're running a tally over the lifetime of my child and saying, okay, we gave her insurance this month, she had this, and now we're at this number. And no matter how much is left, they can get up to that balance back when we lose our kid, okay? And then court-ordered special needs trusts, and now we're into the weeds on legal matters, and this is why I talk to your attorney, might have additional requirements. And then I want to introduce at this point an alternative, and it's called the Developmental Disabilities Endowment Trust Fund. And they have two flavors. They have a self-settled, and then they have a third party. And the third party is set up by family members with their own resources or resources of people independent of the beneficiary. Aunts, uncles, neighbors, friends, whomever might want to supply resources to help a person with special needs during their lifetime. All right, so we've introduced this big concept. It's a trust, and a trust is declared, has its own tax return, it has its own business number, it functions as a business, and it holds stuff in it for the benefit of somebody. And in the case of a self-settled trust, it's for one person, the beneficiary themselves. There can be a second form, and that's the third party, and that's set up by the person who is not the beneficiary, but someone else. And we're going to talk more about those here in a second. Let's press on. Let's talk about one of the first then tools available to you. In 2014, the federal government passed a bill called the Achieving a Better Life Experience Act, the Stephen Beck Jr. Achieving a Better Life Experience Act, and it came to be known as the ABLE Act. And it created ABLE accounts, and they basically copied and pasted the 529 education account language into a new category. And before 2014, unless you had access to a special needs trust, no person with a disability could have more than $2,000. So disability was poverty was an obliged condition of being somebody with a disability. So finally, our federal government figured out, hey, that's not fair, okay? And I see that question, and I'm going to get to that here as we talk about life insurance and naming beneficiaries. So I'm going to pin that one to the end, but I see it. So federal law set these out in 2014, and it commissioned every state to create their own program. And it took, some states got right out of the gates. Virginia was one of the first. Oregon launched their program in 2016. And Washington State launched our program at the end of 2017, but it really didn't get running until 2018. And it's essentially a web-based platform. And our state of Washington and also Oregon have contracted with the Bank of New York Mellon, BNY Mellon, to be the provider of ABLE accounts. And there is an eligibility requirement that's based on each state, okay? But it's a federal definition, and it's that disability must have started by age 26, and it must meet the federal definition. However, one of those is that functional limitations can be listed and certified by a letter from a doctor, and that can give somebody access to an ABLE account. And that's less rigorous than what we'll see for special needs qualifications in a second, okay? What's clever about ABLE accounts is you can chuck money in, $15,000 per year maximum, and if you get to $100,000 or more in a balance in one of these things, the Social Security income benefit will begin to shrink, okay? So that's a key number. And you might be thinking, I'm never gonna get my kid $100,000. Well, what if your house sold after you passed away and you were giving it all to your child and your house sold for $200,000? Well, there's an example. Could be a life insurance policy, okay? So ABLE, you need to be careful of how much money you push into it, okay? What's clever about it, though, is how you get money out of it. And it's for any qualifying disability expenditure. And the lingo here is a QDE. And essentially, it's everything. It can be room and board. It can be vacations. It's great. And the picture is a little fuzzy, but you see an actual debit card, and there are two names on them. There's the person who is the beneficiary of the ABLE account, and then they're kind of personal representative of an ABLE account. So this might be, in the case of the Knight family, Cindy Knight's name would be on the card and Molly Knight's name would be on the card, okay? And the card has a zero balance, but you transfer via the internet up to $500 onto it from the ABLE account so that somebody with a developmental disability can go out with friends or go to the store or go to the movie theater and swipe a debit card just like everybody else. That's one of the coolest things about an ABLE account, is it can act as a bank for people with developmental disabilities. There are costs, okay? Costs $35 a year, and you can choose to have it invested. If you choose to have it invested in something outside of cash, the costs go up, okay? So you could turn this into a stock portfolio for your child if you wanted to, for all or some of the money, but it's a way to take income and push it onto a debit card for them to have a bank-like experience. But the money that's in an ABLE account does not get means tested, okay? It keeps their health benefits and their income benefits in place, at least in the case of SSI, up to $100,000, okay? Some questions rolling in, all right? Would the $100,000 amount limit SSI benefits if they were listed in a trust? No. Any money listed in the special needs trust is completely invisible. There are no limits, and we're going to get to that in a second. Even if multiple children are in the trust. Okay, a special needs trust typically, and now we're talking legal stuff, so let's say Lawson Knight's not an attorney. He's a guy that studied a little bit about special needs trusts. But a special needs trust is for one person, okay? So specifically as it relates to this $100,000 SSI limit, that's for ABLE accounts, but not for trusts. But let's say you wanted to leave money for all of your kids in a trust. So let's talk about the Knight household. I don't mind talking about Cindy and my circumstance. There are 3 girls. We might have a trust for 2 and then a special needs trust for the 3rd, Molly. Or we may elect not to use a trust and give stuff to the other 2 kids and have the special needs trust just for Molly, okay? And you can fund an ABLE account inter vivos during your lifetime or through an estate, okay? I just want you to be aware of the money in pressure. There's also a lifetime limit on the amount of money that can go through these, and it's set at $500,000 federally. And I hope that many of you have an issue with that number because you've got so many resources you want to put out to your kids. So I'm going to come back to the question around advanced directives, and I'm also going to wait to talk about beneficiary designations and how those might be crafted. I'm going to talk about the tools, and then I'm going to talk about how we use the tools. All right, next up, let's talk about a specific kind of special needs trust. Okay, so now I need a special needs trust. You got me, I agree, let's get me one of those, all right? What you do is you go to an attorney and you would have them draft a trust and declare it. And you would either declare it to be created during your life, an inter vivos trust, or you would declare it and have it be a testamentary trust and it would be created during your will. It would be private. You could name uncle, brother, sister, neighbor as the trustee. You could elect to put any property in it and you could invest it in any way you want. It just is for the benefit of the child named as part of the special needs trust. And there is very specific language under the law that makes the special needs trust correct, okay? And when the law changes, that's why you want to have an attorney that can keep that current under the law, okay? So that's one kind of special needs trust, and that's a private one. So you're paying an attorney to write it. You're creating an obligation to do a tax return. And then if there's money that you need managed in the trust, you're going to pay somebody to do that, okay? So those are kind of the costs associated with having your standalone special needs trust. Well, that can get expensive. So if you go back to the turn of the century, our state of Washington passed a bill and created the Developmental Disability Endowment Trust Fund. And the website is here, ddetf.wa.gov. And this is the board that I serve on, and we watch over it. We've got 2,800 trust accounts for residents of the state of Washington, and we have about $60 million in assets held in one trust. So we pool it together, and because we've pooled it, we drive the cost of investments down, and we've driven down the cost of investment management. And then the other really nifty thing for Washington residents is that if you put money in, right now the state matches it. Okay, so it costs $600 to open one. As soon as you get $600 in there, the state takes it, and then over here they put $600 in. It costs $75 to have the tax return prepared. Well, they charge you for that, and then they match it, and they hold on to it on the state side. And they charge you a management fee, and then they match that on the state side. So your balance ends up being the money you put in minus what you've spent plus the money that the state's put in for you equals the amount of money available to support your trust beneficiary. Okay? And then it's professionally managed. I didn't want to get too technically into the investment program or super specific about costs. Happy to talk to anybody about that separately from this. But there is a trustee who's appointed, and it's the ARC of Washington. So this is a nonprofit corporation that's been around for decades, and they have an office, a great staff of very, very caring people. And when we want money out of these, you designate somebody when you create it, and it could be you, that can say, please send my child money for this use. And they have a playbook that you provide when you open this for how it should be used. And that's also the playbook that they will use when you're no longer here. And they will also then take the next person, okay, who would be able to provide instructions. So let's just say we have this in place, Cindy and I pass on, Molly is still here, and we might say name her older sister, Madeline, as the person who could offer instructions to the ARC of Washington to make disbursements for Madeline's behalf. Most of the expenses of the trust are vacations, dental work, funerals. Try to think of some of the other things. There's somebody who has Seahawks tickets they buy through their trust account. Lots of Disneyland vacations. It's for anything related to anything with the exception of, and this is the one part that's different from ABLE accounts. ABLE says a qualifying disability expenditure that can include room and board. And on this one, and it's this bullet under money out, cannot be used for room and board for those on SSI. So if somebody has a disability income, a Social Security income, money from the special needs trust can't be used for basic housing, okay? Now, it has been used to make improvements in a house, or it's been used to put a TV in the house, but it can't be for things like rent or just the basic housing expense, okay? And I'm going to show you a slick trick that's still in the law that kind of gets around that. The law might be changed, but right now, that's where it is. Okay, so you go to this website, you download the forms, you fill it out, you sign it, you have it notarized, you send it in with a check, and you're off to the races. Cindy and I started a few years ago. And so long as you make $25 a month deposit, drip, 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 you get that match, okay? So many of us just got these checks for $1,200 or $500 for our kids. If you don't have an assigned use, maybe it's time to start one of these, okay? So now let's put it all together, and I want to get back to that question then about beneficiary designation forms. And sorry for any Oregonians on the call. I'm kind of giving the Washington example. But now you're building your estate plan, okay? And you get a special needs trust. That's that kind of Washington looking logo there. And you use the pooled state version, or you get a private one. And then you rewrite the beneficiary designations forms for anything that might be going to your kid. Retirement accounts, bank accounts, insurance policies. Anybody that says, hey, fill out this beneficiary designation form, that portion you are sending to your child with special needs, you change it to this trust for benefit of that child, okay? So you replace the current beneficiary designation form with a new one that makes sure the money gets to something like this. Same thing in the will, okay? I give to my child my house, okay? Don't give it to them directly. Name it into a special needs trust. And then it will be invisible. It will be invisible to any means-based test. Also, you do this work during your life. You do an inter vivos trust. You create one while you're living, and you could start contributing now with cash. Or if you have loved ones that know about this, you should tell them, say, please don't give the money to my child. I want you to know about their special needs trust. And you basically funnel money in there, okay? And then you get yourself an ABLE account, okay? And you can direct that the special needs trust make a distribution to an ABLE account, okay? And that's then the place where you spend money, pay bills online, or use that debit card to have cash go out, okay? So you're gonna set up a special needs trust, whether or not you get a private one with an attorney or you use a state pooled example, and then you begin to rewrite where things go, whether that's money for birthday parties, insurance policies, what have you, point them all to that trust so that it's invisible from any test during their lifetime, okay? Then when you need to make expenditure, have it go out, okay? So I think I got the beneficiary designation form. I'm going to get to the healthcare directive. And we had the question about, should I put the money into the ABLE or to a trust? I hope this slide answers that. And that if there's multiple children and one has special needs, then there's going to be multiple trusts. There's going to be one trust for the kids and one trust for the child with developmental disabilities, and they're going to have a special needs trust. And then how do you decide whether or not you should have a trust through Ddetf, or should you get your own, okay? And it comes down to several factors in my opinion. One is size, okay? That I'd say the average balance with the Ddetf is somewhere around like 25,000. So if I were to get my own special needs trust, I'd probably spend $1,000 on an attorney, and I'd probably have a tax return that would cost me $300 to $600 a year. And then I'd have about 0.5% to 1% investment management cost. And there needs to be some economies of scale. And what I'm talking about here is the balance needs to be significantly high in order to make the economics for me make sense to have your own special needs trust, okay? But if you go that route too, you end up with more control, all right? You control who manages it and how. You control who's the trustee on like, who's gonna make sure the money goes out. It's not this office in Olympia with the ARC. You haven't turned it over to a quasi-governmental program. I think those are all factors. So how you feel about the quality of the program, how you feel about cost, the size of the assets, and the reliability over time of somebody to continue to act as a trustee. Oftentimes, like let's say we have a trust, I pass away, we create a trust, and it's now for Molly, and Cindy becomes the trustee. Well, who would be the trustee after Cindy? And if we can't find a friend or family member to serve in that role, then we have to hire somebody. And that's where we're back into cost. But sometimes that cost has a great benefit. We get high quality trust management, professionals to watch over that. And hopefully, Shannon, that answers that question. It ends up being kind of a personal thing, but a big one is essentially how much. And I guess a final thought on that is if any real property is to be part of the trust, that's probably best to hold in a private special needs trust versus a pooled special needs trust. A final thing to say about those before we go on to the next slide is, well, what happens to money that's in a special needs trust if the person with special needs is no longer here? And we're in two camps here. One is this self-settled, or the person's own money. Medicaid can come in and grab money if they spent money on them for healthcare. If the money's in a third party, meaning you set it up for your child, that leftover resource can be passed on to other heirs, Okay, so what might that look like for the Knight family? Special Needs Trust, Cindy and I put money in there. It's for Molly's benefit. We lose Molly and she has surviving siblings, the money goes to them. And if they're gone, but they have kids, the money would go to their children, Cindy and my grandchildren. Okay, so that's how that would pass on.
We do have another question. Is it possible that the Ddetf will no longer match contributions in the future?
Yes, it's entirely possible that they will not match contributions in the future. They have a pot of money that is set aside to make matches. And if the amount of contributions that come in exceeds their ability to continue to match at the same level, they may have to do less of a match or eliminate the match. So right now it's essentially free to have one because of the match. There would then be an out-of-pocket cost, but the relative cost, like a $75 tax return versus one that's several hundred, and the professional management oversight is still on a co-op basis because the cost is shared across thousands of people instead of just one. So hopefully that answers that question. Okay, so estate considerations, again, is the plans we make for our stuff while we're alive for when we're not here. And that when we talk about special needs, we're specifically talking about this idea of means-based, trying to protect eligibility for income and health benefits primarily, especially when we're not here. Okay, doesn't mean that they have those benefits or you apply for them, but they would not be eligible for them at all if they exceed the assets of $2,000. We talked about the three elements of an estate plan: a will, a healthcare directive, and a power of attorney. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about healthcare directives before I wrap and go to questions. And then we talked about how things transfer by beneficiary designation form, will, or trust, and how that's different for people that have to watch out for this means-based test. And then we want to make sure we're accessing special tools. There are two primary ones: the Special Needs Trust and the ABLE account. And then within Special Needs Trust, there's different flavors, private ones and pooled ones. And that as you do this work, you want to make sure you point all of your estate planning and the plans for others towards a vehicle that hides this resource from a means-based test to protect the interest of your loved one. Okay. And with that, I'm going to pivot to, I have some summary stuff about ABLE accounts and Ddetf. If you want this information, email Cindy. She's going to convert it into a PDF and can email it to you. So there's some stuff about that. But the final thing I want you to know about is this thing called caringinfo.org. This is put together by essentially the National Association of Hospices, but they have free healthcare directives for all the states. Okay, so if you follow these instructions, you go to caringinfo.org, you click on Advanced Care Planning, Learn More, you click on Advanced Directives, and then you click on Download Your State's Advanced Directive. You'll get to a PDF that you can complete that creates a legal document for sharing healthcare information. And that's really, really, really important, especially for people over age 18 who don't have spouses. So like kids, okay? And this goes all the way up into the 30s and 40s because most people don't start writing wills until their 40s and 50s. So if this document's not in place, then healthcare providers are legally bound to keep information private and away from people, okay? That's a big, big deal, okay? So imagine your kid gets COVID-19, they're in the hospital, and the hospital can't even tell you how they're doing, all right? So this is a free resource, and it's one of the three legs of the estate plan. I still think there's value in talking to an attorney to complete this, but if you wanted to get something in place, I wanted you to be aware that this existed. All right, we are at the top of the hour, and Cindy, I'm going to turn it back over to you to moderate and see if there's anything else we should talk about tonight.
Well, I just appreciate everybody coming in and catching all this. I do want to say that the chat box is open. If you have a question, I'd love to unmute you.
Do you need the advance directive if you have your guardianship paperwork in place?
No, the guardianship is kind of the trump card. It puts you in charge of everything. That's my understanding.
Okay. And if anybody has any questions about some of the special needs trust stuff, we unfortunately were not ahead of the game like you, and Emma's dad passed away, and we had to do all this stuff after the fact, and it was a nightmare, and it was very expensive. So yeah, if anybody has any personal questions on any of that, let me know, because we've gone through it in a little different route than what you guys are doing and helping people prepare ahead of time.
I appreciate you sharing that, Sarah. I do think that you know, your story is an example of, you know, the pound of prevention or ounce of prevention, pound of cure. You ended up in an okay spot, but the time and resources required to get there, it's harder. I'm sorry for that, but thanks for sharing that. There might be some wisdom, and if we can do this work now, that it can pay dividends later.
Definitely.
Sarah, did you find too that with Oregon, was it, I mean, is there other routes that we should be sharing with Oregonians on like the pooled special needs trusts and things? Are you familiar with any of the Oregon?
Yes, so we did have the Oregon Special Needs Trust with the ARC established prior, and similar to the Washington one, and I did share, but I posted it to Shannon's chat instead of to the group, but Oregon does not match. So this Washington thing is a great thing. And I'm finding the Oregon one is not as easy to work with as what you're describing, Lawson. It's much more restrictive and much more controlled and much more delayed in being able, I have never heard of the debit card being available, for example.
Okay, so let's make sure we talk about that. You should look at Oregon Able, okay? And special needs trust distributions can go into an ABLE account. There isn't a special needs trust that has that debit access. That's a separate tool called the ABLE account.
I have a question, Lawson. What's the typical turnaround time for starting the process to for a special needs trust? What's the time frame typically? What are we looking at? Well, with COVID-19 now, it'll be a ways out before we can get in to see an attorney, but
no, most attorneys' offices have gone remotely. So the ones I've talked to they would email you a worksheet, schedule an appointment, and meet probably in a setting like this or via phone. And the drafting can happen. They're still active. And that's one of the measures of a good attorney, is not how great their legal work is, but how proficient they are at providing competent legal work in a timely fashion. So yes. A private special needs trust, or one that's embedded in a will, depending on their workload, I would expect you to see drafts within a week or two. On the state special needs trust, if you download those documents, they're PDFs, and get those filled out, you should be able to get this trust created in done in a week and a half.
Okay, so it's not like months out typically, or no? Okay.
No.
Okay.
An ABLE account is an online account creation. We haven't done it yet, but had someone I know that did it, and they were able to get the account created in, a matter of minutes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Lawson. I appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks for being here.